The Velari had never failed. They were not just hunters. They were shadows that even light couldn't touch. In the cold corners of the galaxy, they had moved through entire civilizations without ever being seen. Their technology was not only advanced but perfectly quiet. Invisibility was their greatest weapon, but it wasn't only about being unseen by eyes. It was about being unheard, unfelt, and unknown. They had destroyed rebellions before they could start, stolen secrets that others died to protect, and ended leaders without leaving a single trace. To the Velari, hunting was not violence, it was art. And Earth, a blue world with noisy machines and chaotic cities, was their next canvas. They had studied transmissions and intercepted weak satellite signals. They saw war, emotion, music, and confusion, a perfect place to control, to use, and to bend. Humans seemed unaware, simple, and too curious for their own good. The Velari did not expect a challenge. They had taken over planets more advanced than Earth. So, they sent the first scout ships, fully cloaked, touching down in forests, deserts, and oceans. The operation was called Operation Hollow Fog, a quiet takeover, unnoticed and smooth. They believed Earth would fall without a sound. But the moment their feet touched soil, something changed. It was small at first, barely noticeable. In the northern forests, one scout reported being watched, even though no human had eyes on him. Another near a military base said the birds flew away in perfect circles, as if guided by some unseen hand. The Velari ignored these signs. They believed it was coincidence. They trusted their cloaks. After all, no one had ever detected them before. They didn't understand that humans had something no sensor could detect. Instinct. Deep, buried, but always there. A sense that something was wrong. A feeling that danger was near, even when logic said otherwise. And humans, unlike many alien races, did not ignore that feeling. They investigated it. The first real incident happened in Canada, when a man named Jacob Rains felt the air move around him while he was alone in the forest. There was no wind, no animal in sight, but his spine tingled, and his chest tightened. He turned slowly, stared into the trees, and picked up a rock. He didn't know why he threw it, but he did, with force and fear. It struck something midair and bounced back with a hard, hollow sound. He froze. The air shimmered just for a second, like water breaking around an invisible shape. Then it was gone. But Jacob had captured it. His phone had been recording. When he returned to town, he uploaded the video. Many laughed. Some were scared. But a few scientists took it seriously. They enhanced the video, tested the distortion, and realized something terrifying. There was something there. The Velari watched from their hidden bases and panicked quietly. This had never happened before. One of their cloaked agents had been struck, by chance, yes, but hit all the same. The humans had no sensors, no satellites focused on them, yet somehow they had noticed. More and more reports began to surface. Dogs barking wildly at empty air, children crying in their sleep and pointing at corners, hunters firing bullets into what they swore was a shadow moving without sound. It was all random, unconnected, and yet it was happening everywhere. The Velari sent stronger cloaks, deeper camouflage, and even moved into the oceans to hide. But no matter what they did, the feeling followed them. They could not be seen, but they were being felt. It shook them. Inside Earth's secret military labs, researchers began working on experimental equipment. They didn't know what they were looking for, just that something was out there. They used motion sensors, heat detectors, sound wave disruptors, and even magnetic traps. Slowly, patterns began to appear. Small shifts in air pressure, missing energy signatures, sounds that didn't echo. Earth's scientists, driven by fear and obsession, built machines that began to catch glimpses, not of full bodies, but outlines, shadows, and heat prints. The Velari were not perfect anymore. And when they realized humans were adapting so quickly, they made their first mistake. They tried to fight back. In a quiet town, 3 Villari agents tried to silence a scientist who had built a device capable of tracking their path. But the attack failed. The scientist, prepared for danger, had already hidden the plans in a data vault. His lab was rigged with detection lights, and when the Villari entered, their presence triggered an electromagnetic pulse. 2 were captured in magnetic fields. The 3rd barely escaped. The video of the incident leaked. The world changed overnight. The United Nations, once slow and divided, moved fast. A secret alliance was formed. The goal was clear: identify, understand, and eliminate the invisible threat. Villari command was shaken. Their agents were being caught. One of their ships had been grounded by a magnetic net in the Sahara. Their methods, once flawless, were now crumbling. Earth, which they had expected to fall quietly, was rising with noise and fury. But it wasn't just weapons that frightened the Villari. It was the humans themselves. Their minds, so unpredictable. Their fear turned into courage. Their confusion turned into focus. And their curiosity became a weapon. Humans started experimenting with everything: sound, light, smell, even dreams. Some believed they could sense the aliens through emotion or subconscious thoughts. The Villari, who had never faced such raw unpredictability, began to question everything they knew. Then came the final blow. A captured Villari officer was shown to the world, not just to humans, but to the entire galaxy. Earth's leaders had broadcasted his image across deep space channels, sending a message not just in words, but in meaning. We see you, we will find you, and we will not stop. The galaxy listened. Other hidden Villari agents, scattered across other worlds, received the signal. Panic spread among them. If Earth, a planet they had underestimated, could fight back like this, then who else might rise next? The Villari fled, not in warships, but in silence, the way they had always come. But they didn't leave with victory in their hands. They left with fear in their hearts, because they had learned a lesson they would never forget. Humans were not easy to break. Their strength was not just in machines, but in their spirit, in their instincts, in their refusal to bow, even to something they couldn't see. And now, across the galaxy, every species began to look toward Earth, not as prey, but as something new. A warning, a fire that would not go out. The perfect hunters of the stars had met something they couldn't predict, and it changed everything. Jacob Rains was not a soldier, nor a scientist, nor a man of great fame. He was just a quiet forest ranger who loved silence more than people and preferred the sound of wind through trees over any conversation. Living deep in the northern woods, far from the noise of cities, he believed in calm routines, checking for wildfires, guiding lost hikers, fixing broken signs. But all of that changed the day he felt the air shift in a way he had never known before. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't a shadow, just a feeling that something was standing near him, something watching, something breathing, yet not visible. Most would have ignored it, laughed it off, or blamed it on imagination. But Jacob had spent too many years among animals, learning how nature whispers its warnings. His instincts screamed, and without thinking, he picked up a rock and threw it toward the space where the strange pressure lingered. And that one act, born from a deep and ancient human sense, changed history. The rock struck something in the air, bounced off with a metallic thud, and for just a second, the space shimmered like heat above fire. Jacob stumbled back, phone in hand, heart racing. He captured the moment, though unclear and blurry, and uploaded it from his cabin with a note. Something's out here, and I don't think it's human. Most thought it was fake. Others called him insane. But in secret, a few eyes across the world paid attention. Scientists, military analysts, intelligence officers, those who had already started collecting strange reports that didn't make sense until Jacob's video gave them a face to the mystery. They came for him days later, quiet and fast, men and women in unmarked uniforms, not to silence him, but to ask what he saw, how he felt it, and why he reacted. Jacob didn't have science or theories, only words. He spoke of a pressure in the air, a twist in his gut, the kind that animals sense before a storm. He didn't see it, he felt it. And that was enough. They tested him, put him in rooms with faint distortions, asked him to point when the feeling returned. Every time, he was right. Machines couldn't detect anything, but Jacob's senses always flared up in the presence of the invisible. Scientists began to wonder, was it possible that some humans had something beyond measurement, something deep in their biology that could sense the unseen? Jacob wasn't alone for long. Others, in different parts of the world, started coming forward, people who felt watched when no one was there, who sensed movement in still air, who saw flickers of something wrong in their dreams. Jacob became the center of this strange awakening, the first confirmed human who reacted to the cloaked Velari scouts who had started to explore Earth. The Velari were perfect hunters, trained to hide in ways no creature could detect, but they had never dealt with instinct, emotion, or human unpredictability. As Jacob's story spread, it became a symbol, not of fear, but of resistance. The Velari had counted on being ghosts, but now they were being hunted by something they didn't understand, a feeling. When they tried to erase Jacob, sending cloaked agents to his new government-protected shelter, they failed. Jacob didn't fight with weapons. He simply knew they were there. He turned suddenly, stared into empty space, and whispered, "You're not as invisible as you think." The guards fired into the air, hitting two of the intruders. It was the first time humans had killed cloaked Velari without any tech. Jacob wasn't just the first to see them. He was the first to defeat them using nothing but instinct. Earth changed after that. More research poured into the idea of sensory detection. Military squads were trained not only in tech, but in mindfulness, awareness, and environmental reading. The world started to realize that some threats couldn't be seen with eyes, only felt with something older. And at the center of this silent war, Jacob Rains became the quiet legend, the man who felt what others missed. He never liked attention, never gave speeches, but his name spread across command rooms and research labs. The Velari, watching from the shadows, began to fear him, not because of strength, but because he proved that even their perfection had a weakness. They studied him from afar, trying to understand how one human could pierce their cloaks without tools. They found no logic, no pattern, only fear. They began to whisper a new name among their kind, the Unblended One. In their culture, that name had never been used before, because until Earth, no species had ever seen them. Now they started pulling back, avoiding Earth, rethinking their plans, because where there was one like Jacob, there could be more. And humans, those loud, chaotic, emotional beings, had just started waking up. Jacob returned to the forest eventually, not because he gave up, but because he knew his part was done. Others would fight now, others would lead, but the forest was still his home, the place where he first listened to the wind and knew the truth. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind grew still and the world held its breath, he could still feel them, watching, waiting, but now they knew he could see them, and they were afraid. The invisible were no longer safe, because the first human who saw them was only the beginning. For centuries, the Velari moved through the galaxy like shadows, masters of stealth and silence, leaving no sign of their presence except empty ruins and confused survivors. They were called the perfect hunters by those who feared them, an alien race known for tracking, capturing, and erasing entire species before the victims even realized they were being watched. Their ships were invisible, their movements unseen, and their methods quiet. They studied from a distance, calculated every move, and struck only when all hope was gone. Planets fell without battles, civilizations vanished overnight. They had hunted giants, thinkers, builders, and warriors, but nothing had prepared them for Earth. When they arrived, Earth was loud, messy, full of emotion and chaos. Nothing like the logical, predictable species they had conquered before. At first, they watched in silence, cloaked above cities, floating in forests, hiding in deserts, trying to understand the strange creatures called humans. They thought Earth would be easy prey. But then things started to go wrong. One of their scouts was spotted in a forest by a man with no technology, only instinct. Another was taken down by a security team that had been trained not in sensors, but in human awareness. A third vanished without signal, its last message full of panic. The Velari command began to worry. Their advantage, their invisibility, was being broken by something they could not understand. Humans were not supposed to feel them. No species ever had. But somehow, more and more humans began to sense the hunters, not with eyes, not with machines, but with something ancient, something deep. Fear turned into caution, and caution turned into mistakes. The Velari were being seen. Not clearly, not always, but enough. For the first time in their long history, they felt the cold touch of being watched in return. Missions were aborted. Ships were pulled back. But humans didn't stop there. They began to push back, not with lasers or plasma, but with unpredictability, with acts of bravery that didn't follow logic. They set traps without patterns, moved in ways that confused Velari scouts, and hunted the hunters using nothing but courage, madness, and instinct. A squad of Velari infiltrators sent to capture a human research facility went silent within minutes. The surveillance footage showed nothing, but the silence was louder than screams. A message was left behind, scratched into the metal wall in the Velari language. "We see you now." Panic spread among the Velari ranks. They were not just being watched, they were being hunted. The fear that humans once felt began to echo in the minds of their invaders. One by one, their best scouts disappeared. Their cloaked bases were discovered and destroyed. Their commanders argued, unsure how to defeat a species that didn't follow any known strategy. The humans fought with emotion, with chaos, with heart. And that was something the Velari had no defense against. On Earth, small teams of humans trained in forests and deserts, using instinct, experience, and silence. They didn't need advanced weapons. They only needed to know their enemy was nearby. They used sound, smell, pressure in the air, things that couldn't be measured by machines. One of the most feared Velari units, Ghost Team 9, vanished in the mountains of Nepal. All their gear was found neatly piled, untouched, but not a single body remained. In the logs, one word had been etched into their command tablet: run. For the first time, the Velari were not just losing. They were afraid. Their leaders ordered full retreat, their ships jumping away from Earth's orbit, hoping to escape before more were lost. But even then, humans followed. Not with ships, but with a message that spread through the stars. You are not the only hunters. Other species across the galaxy heard the rumors, the stories of Earth. Some were allies of the Velari, others had been victims. Now they saw hope. The perfect hunters had been wounded, and the wound had a name: humanity. The Velari tried to erase the records, to silence the fear, but it was too late. A species that was never supposed to be a threat had become the nightmare. The balance had shifted. In deep space, on a dark moon, once used as a Velari outpost, a single human team stood silently, watching through night vision as their targets moved, unaware. One of the humans whispered into the mic, just like they used to do to us. And with that, the signal was given, and the hunters fell, not to machines, but to shadows, human shadows. The galaxy would never be the same again. Because from that day on, whenever the Velari entered a new system, they wondered if humans were already there, hiding, watching, waiting. The perfect hunters had become the hunted, and the hunt had only just begun. In the cold silence between galaxies, where no light reached and no star dared to shine, the shadows moved. They were ancient, older than memory, existing only in whispers and warnings passed between frightened civilizations. No one had seen them and lived. No one had heard them and remembered. The shadows were not a species, not in the way most life was understood. They were a presence, a force, silent, invisible, and cruel. Worlds they touched were erased from history, systems left quiet and still, as if life had never been there. When they moved, nothing resisted. Until now, humanity had grown in chaos. Born in a world of storms and fire, they fought their own kind, built cities from ashes, and reached the stars with blood still on their hands. Unlike others who feared the darkness, humans studied it, walked into it, and sometimes even smiled at it. When the first human outpost vanished near the galactic edge, the governments of Earth believed it was a system failure. When the second disappeared, they blamed pirates. But the third left a signal. A single word repeated in a loop: shadows. Panic whispered through human space, but it didn't grow into fear. Instead, something colder began to rise: determination. Humans had faced fear before. They had stared into storms, fought monsters of their own making, and survived extinction more than once. Now they faced something unknown, something ancient, something that erased entire histories. But this time, they wouldn't run. Humanity didn't respond with weapons first. They responded with observation. Deep space listening stations were placed across the edges of the void, manned by people trained not just in science but in patience. For years, the shadows said nothing. But the humans waited. They built ships not for war, but for watching. And when they found the patterns, the strange energy disruptions, the cold voids where light refused to travel, they moved. A small fleet entered the dead zone. No communication, no return. But again, a signal came through. One word, typed in a rush, carved into a steel wall by a dying hand: learning. The shadows were studying them. But this time, the humans studied back. They didn't strike blindly. They didn't scream into the dark. They whispered. And the shadows heard. Probes were sent next, disguised as debris, silent and hidden. The humans watched as their enemies moved through space like smoke, bending light, twisting gravity, unseen but not unfelt. The shadows didn't notice at first. But when they did, they changed. Their movements became sharper, faster, angry. Ships began to vanish again. But this time, the humans left traps. Silent drones packed with data bombs. Code meant to be absorbed, not destroyed. When a shadow passed through one, the result was not an explosion, but a message, a voice. Human. Calm. We see you. Across the galaxy, the shadows paused. For the first time in countless cycles, something had spoken to them directly. Something had looked back. That message wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. Humanity was not prey. They were watchers, learners, fighters, and more importantly, they were everywhere now. One by one, dead systems lit up. Signals from hidden satellites, abandoned outposts, and ghost ships all began transmitting the same message. We see you. We know you're there. We're not afraid. It wasn't sent from a single place or a single voice. It was humanity, united, not by governments, but by survival. They didn't try to destroy the shadows. They didn't pretend they could. Instead, they did what humans always did best. They adapted. They turned fear into strategy. Every time a ship vanished, 10 more replaced it. Every time a signal was lost, it was copied and rebroadcast by 100 others. The shadows learned something they had never faced before: resistance without panic, defense without desperation, courage without arrogance. Humans didn't want war. They didn't want destruction. They wanted understanding, but they were ready for both. In one of the oldest sectors, near the edge of the dark, a human station called Sentinel-9 remained untouched longer than any other. The shadows circled it for months, unseen, unspoken. Inside, The crew did nothing but wait and listen. And then, one day, the silence broke. A whisper came through the static. Not human, not words, but intention. A presence that had never communicated before replied. It was not peace. It was not war. It was a question. The shadows had never been challenged, never been studied, never been spoken to. And now, they wanted to understand. The message was clear. Why aren't you afraid? And humanity answered, through every station, ship and satellite. Because we are human. That was the message to the shadows. Not one of violence or surrender, but of strength through understanding, courage through loss, and unity through survival. The shadows didn't leave. They didn't attack. They changed. And for the first time in the galaxy's long history, something moved in the darkness not to consume, but to learn. The war never came. The silence remained. But now it was shared. And that was how humanity sent its message to the shadows, not with weapons or screams, but with knowledge, patience, and the one thing the darkness had never faced before: hope. For thousands of years, the galaxy had followed the same rhythm: empires rising and falling, alliances forming and breaking, ancient species watching from the shadows, while younger ones tried to survive the long, cold stretches of space. The Council of the 11 Worlds, the oldest and most powerful alliance in the known galaxy, believed that nothing new could surprise them. They had seen wars that shattered moons, witnessed stars collapse under the weight of ambition, and survived threats no one dared to speak of now. But all their wisdom, all their technology, and all their arrogance would soon be challenged by something unexpected: humanity. At first, Earth was seen as a distant, irrelevant planet spinning around an average sun. Its people were aggressive, emotional, chaotic. The Council dismissed them as a species doomed to destroy itself before ever reaching the stars. But then, something changed. Humanity survived its own disasters, wars, plagues, and political madness, and instead of falling apart, they came together. They didn't grow slowly like others. They exploded outward, spreading across nearby systems like wildfire. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't follow old traditions. They carved their own path through the stars. The Council grew uneasy. Surveillance ships were sent to observe, expecting to see instability, failure, or collapse. But what they saw was something no one expected: unity born from struggle, progress fueled by curiosity, and a hunger to learn that never stopped. Humans didn't just explore. They adapted, rebuilt, and improved every time something went wrong. And they didn't come alone. They brought music, art, laughter, and stories. They traded without fear, shared without pride, and studied every species they met not to conquer, but to understand. That was more terrifying than any weapon. Because knowledge, when used by minds that never gave up, could rewrite everything. It was not a war fleet that arrived at the Council's doorstep, but a delegation. They came in ships that looked strange, sharp, sleek, and alive with energy. Nothing like the heavy, polished crafts of the older empires. The humans stepped into the great hall without hesitation. They wore no armor, carried no weapons, but their eyes held the weight of 1,000 battles and 1,000 recoveries. They didn't bow. They didn't demand. They simply offered a proposal, a new way forward. The Council laughed at first. They had ruled for centuries, seen young species come and go. Who were these upstarts to speak of unity, reform, and shared strength? But then the humans spoke. Not with threats, not with promises, but with truth. They showed evidence of dying worlds saved by their technology, of forgotten species given voices again, of ancient enemies now working side by side, because humans refused to let old hatreds win. And when the Council tried to silence them, tried to mock them as naive, something strange happened. Other voices rose. Minor species, long ignored or oppressed, stood up. They had worked with humans, lived beside them, and seen what the Council had refused to see: hope, change, progress, A storm of support began to build, not through force, but through belief. And that scared the council more than anything. For the first time in memory, their control began to shake, not because of war, but because someone had offered something better. Whispers spread. Worlds that had remained neutral for centuries asked to meet the humans. Border colonies once abandoned asked to join their alliance. Even old rivals found common ground through shared cooperation. The galaxy began to shift. Of course, not everyone welcomed this change. Some factions saw humanity as a threat to the old order. Sabotage, lies, and political traps were set. But every time, the humans responded not with vengeance, but with resilience. They exposed corruption, rebuilt what was broken, and kept moving forward. They were not perfect. They made mistakes. But they learned fast, faster than anyone had expected. One by one, the pillars of the old galaxy began to fall, not through violence, but through a new idea. That strength wasn't just power, but understanding. That unity wasn't about control, but about trust. And slowly, painfully, the council began to listen. The vote came during the longest night of the cycle. The hall was silent, filled with tension thicker than any battlefield. 11 voices cast their decisions. The humans waited. When the result was spoken, it was like thunder across the stars. Humanity was accepted, not as a junior member, not as an observer, but as a founding voice in a new council. The old structure was dissolved. A new alliance was born, one that included voices once forgotten, species once silenced, and ideas that had been buried for too long. A new chapter of galactic history had begun, not because of conquest, but because a small, wild species from a forgotten planet dared to believe in something better. They didn't rewrite the rules. They threw them away and wrote new ones with every step forward. And the galaxy, for all its fear and doubt, followed. From that moment on, space was never the same. Stars were not just points of light, but beacons of connection. Planets were not just resources but homes. And humanity, once underestimated and ignored, became the storytellers of a new era, one not shaped by power, but by possibility.